Hi everybody, and thanks for tuning into this video about how to use some basic features in Microsoft Excel. Now, many of you may know Excel as that program on the taskbar of your computer that you accidentally clicked open once, and when it was opening, you suddenly said, oh no, what do I do?" and rapidly clicked the X in the upper right-hand corner until the program went away, at which time you breathed a sigh of relief. The point is, spreadsheets can be a little bit scary. The reason why they are that way is because they're not really intuitive like word processors are. When we were using Microsoft Word and typing things, the text always displayed from left to right in paragraph form like we always see in books. The text never really overlapped over itself, so we didn't have to deal with weird situations with text that we weren't really used to. In spreadsheets, sometimes we are going to see some things that don't really make logical sense at first. It takes some time using spreadsheets to get used to them. So if you've worked with spreadsheets before, you're probably going to find this first basic assignment to be fairly easy. I just want to reassure you this is an easy spreadsheet assignment. However, if you've never used spreadsheets before, this is going to take some time and effort to do this assignment. I would also encourage you to please stick with it because spreadsheets are very powerful tools. They allow us to crunch a whole bunch of data that would take many minutes or maybe even hours. They allow us to crunch that data in just a few seconds when we enter it quickly into the spreadsheet. You're going to see some of the powerful effects that spreadsheets can have as we do this assignment. To begin, we're going to open up this document titled SS1 Alpine Budget. That document should open up in Microsoft Word. And you're going to see that there's a step-by-step instruction list that tells you exactly what to do for this first spreadsheet assignment. For this first one, I'm going to walk you through exactly what to do to set up your spreadsheet correctly, including formulas in your spreadsheet to do some calculations. Now, as I say that, I just want to make the note, you could theoretically create a spreadsheet that only had data in it, but that wouldn't be a very useful spreadsheet. So for this assignment, you are required to include formulas to calculate numbers. If you don't do that, if you just data enter the numbers at the end instead of putting in formulas to calculate them, you may earn 1 point on this assignment for doing some data entry, but that's it. Make sure you're following along and paying attention to how to use formulas to calculate things. The first instruction says to open a spreadsheet program, and we're going to open Microsoft Excel because that's what we're using. So I'm going to go to my search bar, I'm going to enter Excel, and voila, there's Microsoft Excel. And now that I'm in here, I'm going to open a blank workbook. And this is what an Excel spreadsheet looks like. I'm going to maximize the screen for a second to show you a few different things. The first thing I want to show you is what happens when you move around the spreadsheet. Notice that I can click on any one of these rectangles in the back, and the cursor sort of moves around with whatever rectangle I click on. Now, these rectangles in the back are called cells in Microsoft Excel, and every cell in a spreadsheet, which is the collection of all of these rectangles, every cell in a spreadsheet has an address. The address of this cell is L, because that's its column letter, and 8, because that's its row number. So the columns are always identified by letters, the rows are always by numbers, and each cell has an address that is its column letter and row number. If I was trying to select cell R20, it'd be a little difficult to go over to R and then count down 1, 2, 3, 4. It'd be difficult to count all the way down, so instead, what Microsoft Excel does for us is it gives us what the address of the current cell is right here in this little address box. So no matter where we move to, it will tell us what the active cell is. And that's great because when we're writing formulas later to calculate stuff, we use the addresses of cells in the formulas. For example, I might want to take the contents of cell B2 and multiply it by 6. So I just type in B2 times 6. All right, let's go back to the instruction sheet now that we've seen what a spreadsheet looks like. We're going to go to some more spreadsheet features in just a bit. But my first instruction is to type in this information. So I'm going to type it into the spreadsheet where it looks like it belongs. So in cell A1, it should say Alpine race budget. Now here's the first time we're going to encounter something that is a little bit counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense right away. I'm going to type in Alpine race. Oh, right now, if I type another character, it looks like I'm going to go beyond the edge of the cell that I'm in, because column A is only this wide. What happens if I keep typing beyond the edge of a cell? Well, let's do it. Notice, hey, this looks pretty normal. Just like Microsoft Word, if I keep typing, it will just keep adding characters to the right. But now what happens if I needed to type something into column B? Like, let's say I type the word budget again. Notice that what was in column A, cell A1, was just sort of overwritten by what I typed in B1. Now here's the thing. It looks like we lost information, right? It looks like we lost the E at the end of race and then the word budget from cell A1. But when I click on it, notice that the entire contents of that cell display right up here. It's all still there. It's just I couldn't display the entire thing because my column wasn't wide enough. I'll show you how to deal with that in just a moment, but I want you to understand what spreadsheets do. Spreadsheets allow you to enter information into all of these cells in the background, and each cell will store the information that you type into it. Even if the information that you type is too big to display in the cell, like my entire phrase, Alpine race budget, it doesn't mean that that information isn't there. It just can't display it all, but it is storing it in cell A1. Here's another important thing to remember. We're going to work with formatting spreadsheets to make them look nice. But spreadsheets aren't designed at their root to look really pretty. Word processors are designed to make things look really nice when they're done. But first and foremost, spreadsheets are designed to store and to process data. We can make a lot of nice looking displays with spreadsheets, but really the main powerful thing that they do isn't making things look nice. It's storing and doing calculations with information. All right, I'm going to get rid of this word budget because it's not supposed to be there. To do that, I just clicked on the cell and pressed the delete or backspace key. And then I'm just going to move around to the next cells that I need and enter the information. Now, to move around in a spreadsheet, there's a couple of things you can do. If you press the Enter key, it will move down one cell from where you currently are. The Tab key will move to the right one cell from where you currently are. If you hold down Shift and press the Tab key, it will move to the left one cell. And if you hold down Shift and press Enter, it will move up one cell. You can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard to easily move around and navigate in a spreadsheet, or you can use the mouse to click on the next cell that you want to enter information into. By the way, when you click on cells, if you click and select a whole bunch of cells by just clicking the middle of a cell, you can select multiple cells at the same time. Now, this is not useful for entering information necessarily. Like, I can't enter the same thing by just typing into one of these cells. It won't copy it to all of them. But what it would let me do is format all of these cells at the same time. And we'll get into that a little bit later too. So I'm going to go right below my Alpine race budget cell, and I'm just going to enter the information that's in the sample spreadsheet that I need to enter. Okay, I've entered my first column worth of information, but I want to take a moment to show you something very powerful that Excel can do. Now, I'm not entering the information that's in the instructions right now. I'm just going to go to a quick aside, but I want to show you something interesting. One of the things that Excel spreadsheets does is it will try to predict the information that you're trying to enter, and if it can do that, then it can help you enter information more quickly. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I were to type January in this expenses row, look at what I can do with it. Now remember, if I click and drag between cells just by clicking the center, it just selects a bunch of cells. But I want to show you another thing you can do by clicking and dragging. You'll notice there's this little square at the corner of the cell January. That square is known as the fill handle. If you hover over that fill handle, you'll notice that your cursor changes from the fat white plus symbol to a small thin black plus symbol. When it changes to this symbol, you know that the fill handle is activated and it's going to fill information into cells based on what's in your current cell. Look what I can do with this. If I enter January and I click and drag, it knows that I want to enter months, so it's going to assume that the months that I'm entering are the months of the year, and it will just fill those across the page as far as I click. Another thing that you can use the fill handle for, let's say I enter numerical data into one of these columns, and then I click and drag down the column in March. Now notice, right now, it's just copying what's in my first cell into all of my other cells. You can use it to copy information like that. However, what if I was trying to enter like a series of numbers that counted from 1 upward? If I go down to the bottom where the fill handle is, you'll notice to the lower right, there's this autofill options menu. And if I click on that and tell it I was trying to enter a series, Excel automatically knows that it needs to count up incrementally by whole numbers. So those are some of the interesting features that you can use in Excel. I'm going to show you just how cool Excel is at guessing what it is that you're trying to type. In my spreadsheet, I am required to enter May and June with the word %. So if I type May and % here, Excel is smart enough to figure out that I typed a month here, but not a month here. And if I click and drag over, it knows that I'm trying to enter the month and then the word %. So it will enter the next month and % for me to make it look like the spreadsheet is supposed to look in my sample. Or you could just type the word May and then % and then June and %. That works as well. But Excel does some of the heavy lifting for you when it comes to doing calculations and figuring out what sorts of things you want to type. Here's another thing that's interesting about Excel. Excel knows the difference between when you're trying to type a word and when you're trying to type a number. And it also knows when you're trying to type a formula that does calculations and functions on words and numbers. So notice this. All of the words that I typed so far are aligned to the left-hand side of the cell. If I type a number here, 30,000, notice that it knows to right align it because it's a different piece of information. It's a number. And because it recognizes that as a number, Excel can do calculations with that. I'm going to enter the rest of these numbers in this column. Now that I've entered all these numbers, I'm going to show you some important things. Now notice that I have a whole bunch of information in column A that is now cut off because it was too wide for the column, and when I typed into column B, it couldn't display what was in column A. So I'm going to show you how to resize column A so that everything fits. To do that, if you hover the mouse between columns A and B, you'll notice that the mouse changes to a double-sided arrow. If I click and drag when the mouse is that double-sided arrow, it will allow me to resize the column to whatever I want it to be. If I want to do a quick resize to make it just wide enough to accommodate the text in column A, all you need to do is hover over between the columns as the double-sided arrow and double-click. And that will resize it automatically to fit your widest line of text. Look what happens when I resize column B. There's numbers in this column. If I resize it so it's too small, look what happens to the numbers. They suddenly change from showing the numbers to showing these pound signs, and it looks like I lost that data. It looks like something went wrong with my spreadsheet. Well, actually, nothing went wrong. It's just that column's not wide enough to correctly display the number. And what Excel doesn't want to do, it doesn't want you to look at a partially displayed number like 30,000, except the last zero gets cut off, and think that it's a smaller number because one of the zeros gets cut off. So instead of displaying part of the number, it just doesn't display any of it. It displays some pound symbols to show you that there's a number there. Your data is still stored in that cell. It still says 30,000 in the formula bar when I click on that cell. Also, if I was doing calculations on that cell, it would correctly use the number that was in that cell to do those calculations. However, if you want it to display nicely, do the same thing as we did with column A. Hover between B and C until the cursor turns to a double-sided arrow, and then just double-click. and it will display the entire width of that cell. Okay, time to start doing some calculations with Excel using the total expenses row here. I want to calculate the total for all of these different May expenses. To do that, I could type in a couple of different formulas that would add those all up for me. Here's the simplest formula conceptually, but here's one that you don't want to use. Okay, so first of all, to start typing a formula, for Excel to recognize what you're typing as a formula, you have to start by typing the equal sign. Okay, make sure you use the equal sign first, and then you can enter a whole bunch of cell addresses and operations for what you want to do with them. To calculate the total cost for May, I'm going to have to add up all of these individual numbers in these cells above. So first off, I'm going to start by typing B3. Notice that it shows me the cell that I just selected, plus B4, plus, I'm going to type a plus again. Notice what else I can do. If I just click on cell B5, it enters it into the formula for me. Plus B6, plus B7, that's going to give me the total amount, $122,000 for May. Now, there has to be a better way, because what if I was calculating expenses for a complex business that had 100 different items that we could have expenses from? It would take forever to do that for different columns. Instead, there is a tool built into Excel known as AutoSum, or the sum function, and it will actually give me the sum of a bunch of cells much more easily than this. So I'm going to click and drag in this formula. I want you to notice if I just click on my total expenses cell and try to make a change, the moment I type anything, it's actually going to delete the entire thing or start overwriting what I've got there. If I just want to make a change to a part of a function, one of the easiest ways to do that is to go up here into the formula bar where my entire formula is typed out, and to just click and drag and make changes in here to the text. So let's say instead of adding each of these individual cells, I wanted to do the sum of all the cells. Now, I've used Excel quite a bit before, and I know that there is a function called sum, and all I need to do is type the word sum and then a parenthesis and tell it what I want to add. I want the sum of B3 through B7. Notice what that looks like in my formula bar. Sum B3, B7. B3 through B7 is in parentheses, and when I hit enter, that automatically calculates the sum without having to enter each individual cell and plus signs. There is even another way to do it. I'm going to delete what I just did. I'm going to do this the easiest way of all, because Excel has a bunch of basic formulas built into the ribbon up here that we can use at just a few mouse clicks. And notice up here where it says auto sum and there's this little drop down arrow. This actually gives me options for a whole bunch of functions that you might regularly use in Excel, including the sum function. And when I click this here, it's going to guess what I want to add together. And in this case, Microsoft Excel guesses correctly. It knows I want to add all of the numbers above that cell from B3 to B7. So if I click enter, it will add those numbers to me. Let's enter one more function that's important for our spreadsheet. Down here where it says under over budget, we're going to look at the total actual expenses that our business incurred and compare it to the budget that we had available to see if we stayed under budget. And to do that, for this spreadsheet, I'm going to type equals, so it knows I'm entering a formula, and we're going to take the total budget amount that we had and subtract the total amount that we spent. The reason we're doing this is because if this comes out to be a positive number, that tells us that we stayed under our budget. If this comes out to be a negative number, it will tell us the amount that we went over budget, and that would be bad if you worked at a business. You want to stay under budget. So notice my formula, B10 minus B8. When I press enter, it correctly enters 13,000 as the amount that I was under budget. But now, what if a late bill comes in? What if suddenly I realized there were special food requests? The next instruction says we're going to change the value in cell B4 to 9,762. Now, that'd be a doozy of a bill to miss, almost $10,000. But let's say you did. What's that going to do when I've already typed formulas down here? The cool thing about using formulas instead of using just typed numbers that you data enter is that the formulas will adjust as your numbers change. Watch the total expenses and the under over budget. When I enter that new value for special food requests, my total expenses change and it knows that I'm not under budget by as much that I was before. All right, let's enter the June information on this spreadsheet. We're going to do the same thing. So at this point, you should know how to data enter information into Excel using the Enter key to advance down to the next cell. You should also know how to start a formula in Excel. So you start with the equal sign, and then you could type sum, and then select the numbers you want to add up. Or even easier, even if without typing the equal sign, you can go up to this auto sum tool that's in the ribbon at the top, and it will automatically guess what you're trying to add together. And voila, we've got exactly what we needed Excel to do for us. It's entering formulas and doing calculations for us. Now, here's another cool thing that Excel is able to do. If I have a formula in a row or a column of a spreadsheet that does the same thing across that row or all the way down the column, Excel can copy that formula for me to a different place. Watch what I mean by that. Here I have this formula B10 minus B8. I want to do the same thing over here in column D. Well, look what happens when we grab the fill handle and move it over. Notice that it automatically copies my formula B10 minus B8 to these different columns and makes it the same thing. This is for column C, C10 minus C8. D10 minus D8, which is exactly what we wanted to do for the under over budget entry in this column. So I didn't even have to type anything for this formula. I just copied this formula over. Let me show you another way to do that. If you just copy this cell like you would copy anything in any Microsoft product, you could either use the shortcut key Control C, or you can right click and say copy. If I paste this cell here, maybe you're thinking it's going to paste the number 3,238, but it's not actually copying and pasting the calculated value. It copies and pastes the formula. And look what happens when I paste the formula here. It knows that I'm in a different column, so it's going to change it to say D10 minus D8. I was able to copy that formula over to here. So just two easy ways to do that. Maybe the easier of the two is just to grab the fill handle by hovering the mouse over the lower right-hand corner and clicking and dragging. But you could also copy and paste formulas in a spreadsheet as well. And then the next instruction is to insert a row between the title of my spreadsheet, in my spreadsheet that's Alpine Race Budget, and then the body of my spreadsheet, which is everything else. To insert a row, you click in a cell in the row that you want to insert a row above. So I want to insert a row above row 2. So I can click on any cell that I want as long as it's in row 2. Then I go up to the top here and see where in the cells area of the ribbon, if I click on the drop-down menu under Insert, I can click to insert a sheet row, and it inserts an extra row up above, just like the instructions required. The next thing the instructions tell me to do is calculate the percent of my total budget available that each of these budget items account for. How much of the budget did they consume? For some reason, calculating percentages comes very difficult to some college students and very easy to some others. Just remember, a percentage is the amount compared to the whole amount that something is, and we use the division operator to calculate a percentage. So how much of the whole amount of my budget is basic food? Here's how we're going to do that in Excel. I'm going to hit the equals key, so it knows that I'm typing a function. I'm going to select basic food, which is the number that's a part of the whole. I'm going to divide that number by the whole, by the entire budget available. And that should give me a percentage, which is always going to be a decimal at first. It's going to give me a percentage that basic food is of the whole budget. Now let's say I want to copy this formula down so that it calculates a percentage for special food requests, lodging, bicycles, and promotions. As I copy this formula down, you're going to notice that I get some problems right away. First of all, a percentage is not going to be above 1 in this case. It's not going to have above 100%. And then I get this weird div/0 exclamation point error, which is the closest thing Excel is going to do to swearing at you. So I've got some problems here. And if I look at what I'm doing, I can see immediately why there's some problems. Notice in this one, I'm dividing B5. Instead of dividing it by the whole amount of my total budget, Excel thought I was trying to copy down the entire formula, and it's dividing by cell B12 instead of B11. This errored cell is trying to divide B6, which is a number around 60,000. It's trying to divide that by 0 because it divided down by the next cell below. And you can't divide anything by 0. So how do I fix that so that I can easily copy this information down? Well, here's the thing. We need to tell Microsoft Excel that we want this to always divide by B11 and not to change the value of this cell when I'm doing my calculations. That's called an absolute cell reference. We absolutely want it to reference the same cell regardless of where we copy and paste or fill this formula. To do that on a PC, if you hover over the cell reference that you want to change and press F4, it'll put some dollar signs into the cell reference for you. And those dollar signs mean that when you copy that formula to a different cell, it's not going to change the value of B11. It's going to leave that as the same cell. If you're doing this on a Mac computer, you would again hover over the cell reference that you want to change and then press Command T and it does the same thing. When I press enter, notice it didn't change this percent because the formula is the same, but look what happens when I fill this formula down. Now it correctly calculates the percentages for each of these values compared to the total budget available because it's dividing in each one of these by cell B11 and it's not changing it to a different cell address as I copy it down. What happens if I take this entire column of percents that I calculated and copy it? Notice I clicked and dragged to select the entire column. I copied, and what if I paste it over here? Will it correctly copy the formula so it takes these values and divides them by the total budget available? Well, look at what happens. It does correctly use the values in the D column. However, it's still dividing them by the whole for the month of May, 135,000. It should be dividing them by the whole for the month of June instead. That's an easy fix. I need to change the absolute reference so it's reading, instead of column B, where I have my May references, I want it to read column D11. Notice that when I typed D, so it said D11, it showed me that it's now referencing the correct cell. And then if I click and drag the fill handle to copy that formula downward here, now all of these are calculating correctly the percentage of the June budget item compared to the total budget available. Now I see in my spreadsheet example that there's one more thing I need to do. I do need for this total budget available, even though it's a little obvious, I do need for this to have a 100% here so that I know that this is 100% of the budget. If I just click and drag this down a couple of columns, notice what this formula is, B11 divided by B11, because obviously 135,000 is 100% of 135,000. If I divide it by itself, it gives me 100% of it. Notice I have this extra 0 in this blank row. If I just click on that and hit the backspace key, it will get rid of that extra 0 for me. I want to do the same thing for this last column. I want to enter 1 here so I know I have 100% of the total budget listed, and then press delete. Now my spreadsheet is complete. Now again, now all of the data in this spreadsheet is complete. It doesn't look pretty yet, so I'm going to need to change a few things, but at least I've got all the numbers in here. There's one more thing I want to show you. When I'm grading these, like I mentioned before, you could theoretically try to trick me and just type in the data from the sample sheet instead of actually entering any formulas, but there's an extremely easy way for me to check that. If I hold down the control key and hit the tilde button on the keyboard, it actually shows me where you have formulas and where you just entered data. So I am going to be able to see whether or not your spreadsheet was set up with formulas or whether you just typed in data from the spreadsheet. Make sure that you're using formulas because they make things extremely easy to do in spreadsheets. Okay, the last things that I need to do are to apply some formatting features to make this spreadsheet look better, even though it's never going to look all that great on a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. The first thing that I need to do is add some emphasis to the title. You're going to notice that a lot of the features in Microsoft Excel are the same as features in Microsoft Word, but there are some additional features like this one. I want to take my title and I want to center it across the top of all of these cells. In fact, I'm going to have to merge all of these cells together so my title is just one big cell at the top. There's a tool in the ribbon on the Home tab called Merge and Center, and when you click that, it merges all of those cells into one big cell and it centers the text on them. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. Also, I need to increase the size of this text by clicking the increase size button a few times. We'll make it 16 point. I want this text in bold and I want it italicized. That looks a lot like what's on the instruction sheet for the title of this spreadsheet. The next thing I'm going to want to do, notice in the expenses column, everything is larger, bolded, and italicized as well. So I'm going to do that the exact same way. I don't need to merge and center these, but I do need to increase the font size, this time to 14, bold, and italicize using tools that I have on the ribbon for adjusting the font. Also, I notice in the instructions that all of the expense items are indented. To do that, if I click and drag down the expense column, I can choose to indent the text by choosing increase indent, and that moves everything over. But now I've cut off some of the text for some of the labels here. To change that, if I go back up here between columns A and B and double click, it's now going to display everything that's in that column. As I'm cleaning things up here, there's a few more things that I need to do. I need to change percentages to actually show as percentages in my spreadsheet, and I need to change dollar figures to show as dollars and cents in my spreadsheet. Let's do the percentages first. I'm going to click and drag over an entire section of percentages, and actually a cool feature in Excel is that if you hold down the control key, you can click and drag and select non-adjacent columns. So I clicked and dragged to select this column. I held down control and then I clicked and dragged to select this column. Now I can format non-adjacent columns at the same time. I want to change the way that this displays numerically, and there's a very quick way to do that in Microsoft Excel. In the number area of the ribbon, notice that it has a bunch of preset formatting styles for things that you'll commonly use. So if I click on the percent style, it will automatically display these as percentages rounded to the nearest whole number, which is exactly what I want. I noticed that I missed these two percentages, my 100%. So I'm just going to click those by holding down Control and add those to the cells that I have selected. And I'm just going to click this again to change those to percentages as well. Now I need to change these values in these columns to numerical values with a $sign. If I choose the $sign here, it's going to automatically implement the accounting format. Notice that now it displays dollars and cents, and the $sign is always aligned way at the left-hand side of the cell. There is another dollar format that you could use called currency, which also shows dollars and cents, but it doesn't left align the $sign. I'm going to undo that because I prefer the currency format, and now your spreadsheet should be complete. This is everything that we were required to have in here, including all of the column labels, the row labels that show what the expenses are, and then all the formulas to calculate the totals and the percentages. Hopefully at this point you're getting a sense for how powerful a tool Microsoft Excel can be. For a small spreadsheet like this, maybe it doesn't seem like it did all that much. But when you get into large spreadsheets with hundreds of expense items that are all being added together and you need to change a couple of things and it automatically recalculates for you, spreadsheets become a very powerful tool. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, if you have questions, make sure that you email or stop by my office and ask.